High Arbitrator Xylos stood before the great window of his office, watching the ships move through the capital city like silver fish in a dark sea. His reflection stared back at him, tall, slender, with skin the color of old stone. He was Vorthan, and to be Vorthan was to be logical, precise, and above all, superior. 300 years ago, his ancestors had found a broken species on a dying world. Humans. They had been killing each other with primitive weapons when the Vorthan first arrived. The Vorthan had offered a gift, technology, protection, and a place in the hegemony. In return, the humans would work. They would mine, build, and serve. It was a fair trade. The Vorthan called it uplifting. The humans called it survival. Xylos turned to his desk, where the annual census waited on a glowing screen. He scrolled through the numbers with mild interest. Human population had grown beyond expectations. Their colonies had expanded to the edges of their allotted sector, but no further. They had stayed where they were told. Good. He opened the financial records. Every cycle, like clockwork, the humans made their payments. The development loan had been massive, a gift of FTL engines, terraforming technology, and military protection did not come cheap. The humans had accepted the terms without complaint. They paid their minimum dues every single time, never late, never short. For 300 years. Xylos leaned back in his chair, his long fingers tapping the armrest. He had to admit, the humans were useful. Their engineers could fix anything. Their soldiers fought with a ferocity that surprised even the Vorthan War Council. And their logistics, the way they moved goods across the galaxy with such efficiency, had become essential to the hegemony's economy. They were like a reliable tool, one that never broke. A chime sounded at his door. His assistant entered, a younger Vorthan named the Sal. High Arbitrator, the human ambassador has arrived for the quarterly review. Xylos waved a hand. Send him in. The door slid open, and Ambassador Elias Vance walked in. He was shorter than the Vorthan, broader in the shoulders, with gray hair and a face that showed his age. He wore a simple dak suit, nothing like the elaborate robes of the other ambassadors. He stood quietly, waiting to be acknowledged. Xylos gestured to a chair. Ambassador, I trust your journey was acceptable. It was, High Arbitrator. Vance sat down, his movements calm and unhurried. Xylos studied him for a moment. The humans had sent many ambassadors over the centuries. They had all been the same, polite, deferential, eager to please. He expected nothing different today. I have reviewed your sector's performance, Xylos began, pulling up the relevant data. Your colonies have expanded significantly. Your industrial output has increased by 15% in the last cycle alone. These are impressive numbers. Thank you, Vance said simply. Xylos allowed a thin smile. However, with growth comes responsibility. The hegemony has determined that your territorial tithe must be adjusted to reflect your increased capacity. The new rate will be 8% higher, effective immediately. He waited for the protest, for the plea, for the human to explain how this would strain their resources, how they needed more time, how they hoped the great hegemony would show mercy. Every other client species did the same. Vance did none of those things. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small data slate. It was old, worn at the edges, the screen scratched from years of use. He placed it on Xylos's desk. High Arbitrator, before you make that decision, I would like you to review something. Xylos blinked. Review what? Our accounting. The words hung in the air. Xylos felt a flicker of annoyance. Accounting? What could a human possibly teach him about numbers? Your people have kept excellent records for 300 years, Vance continued, his voice steady. Every shipment of raw materials, every ton of ore, every warship we built for your fleet at a fraction of the market cost, every soldier we lost fighting your border wars, every technology transfer that was, let us say, less advanced than what your own species uses. Xylos's annoyance deepened. What is your point, Ambassador? Vance pointed to the data slate. My point is that we have been keeping our own records too. Not just of what we owe, but of what we have given. Your interest rates, your fees, your adjustments, we tracked all of it. And we calculated our own rate. Your own rate. Xylos almost laughed. You cannot simply invent. We didn't invent it, Vance interrupted, which was something no ambassador had ever done. We used your formulas. Your logic. Your system. We just applied it to our contributions. The labor, the resources, the strategic value we provided to the hegemony. We treated it as an investment. He tapped the data slate. The final number is in there. According to our calculations, we no longer owe anything. In fact, High Arbitrator, you now owe us. The silence that followed was absolute. Xylos stared at the human, waiting for the joke to end. But Vance's face remained calm, his eyes clear. For the first time in 300 years, a client species had just told the Vorthan hegemony that the debt was not only paid, it was reversed. Xylos felt something he had not felt in a very long time. A small, cold knot of uncertainty forming in his chest. Xylos stared at the data slate for a long moment. Then he laughed. It was not a kind laugh. It was the laugh of a powerful being who had just heard something ridiculous from something small. He pushed the data slate back across the desk with one long finger. You come here, Xylos said, still smiling. With 300 years of good behavior, and you think a few numbers will change your place in this hegemony. Ambassador Elias Vance did not move. His hands rested on his knees, his back straight, his face calm. He looked like a man who had waited a very long time for this moment and was not about to rush it now. High Arbitrator, Vance said quietly, I am not asking you to change anything. I am simply presenting facts. Xylos stood up. He was tall, much taller than the human, and he used that height to loom over the desk. Facts. You want facts. The fact is that your species was dying in the dirt when we found you. The fact is that you would still be throwing rocks at each other if we had not given you the stars. And the fact is that you owe everything you have to us. Vance nodded slowly. That is one way to look at it. There is no other way. There is always another way. Vance gestured to the data slate. We have simply been counting differently than you. Xylos picked up the data slate and tossed it onto a side table. It clattered against the polished surface. I do not care how you have been counting. The tithe increase stands. Your people will pay it, as they have always paid, and we will speak no more of this creative mathematics. He expected Vance to stand, to bow, to accept the decision with the same quiet obedience his predecessors had shown for 3 centuries. Instead, the human ambassador reached into his jacket and pulled out a second data slate. This one looked even older, the edges worn smooth from use. I brought a copy, Vance said. I thought you might do that. Xylos felt his patience thinning. Ambassador, I am giving you a chance to leave with your dignity intact. Do not mistake my tolerance for weakness. I would never mistake that, High Arbitrator. Vance stood up slowly. He was not tall, but he did not look small either. He looked solid, like something built to last. I will leave. But I want you to look at the numbers. Not today, if you are busy. But look at them. He placed the second data slate carefully on Xylos's desk. Then he turned and walked to the door. One more thing, Vance said, pausing at the threshold. You asked why we never complained. For 300 years, we paid every fee, accepted every increase, fought every war you asked us to fight. You probably thought it was obedience. Xylos narrowed his eyes. What else would it be? Vance smiled. It was a small smile, not happy exactly, but satisfied. Patience, High Arbitrator. It was patience. The door closed behind him, and Xylos was alone. He stood there for a long time, looking at the door. Then he looked at the data slate on his desk. He wanted to throw it out the window. He wanted to summon security and have the human arrested for insolence. He wanted to increase the tithe to 20% just to teach the primitive a lesson. Instead, he sat back down. He told himself he was only looking at the numbers to find the flaws. He would find the human errors, the miscalculations, the wishful thinking of a desperate species trying to bargain its way out of its place. He would expose the whole thing as nonsense, and then he would enjoy watching the human ambassador explain himself to the full council. He opened the file. The first page was simple. It listed every technology transfer the hegemony had given humanity in the first 50 years. Beside each entry was a second entry, written in human handwriting, describing the actual capability of that technology compared to what the Vorthan used themselves. Xylos felt his smile fade. The FTL drives the humans received were 3 generations behind the ones Vorthan ships used. The terraforming equipment was old, slow, prone to breaking. The weapons systems had been stripped of their most advanced features before being handed over. The humans had documented all of it. Every downgrade. Every shortcut. Every way the hegemony had kept them weak enough to control. He scrolled to the next section. This one covered military service. For 300 years, human soldiers had fought alongside Vorthan forces in every major conflict. The humans had done the dangerous work, the ground assaults, the boarding actions, the last stands. They had lost millions. And they had done it without complaint. But they had also kept records. Every battle, every casualty, every strategic victory that had been credited to Vorthan commanders but won by human soldiers. They had listed it all, along with what a fair market rate for such services would have been. Xylos turned to the third section. This one was the longest. It covered trade, manufacturing, and logistics. The humans had built the ships that protected Vorthan trade routes. They had mined the minerals that powered Vorthan cities. They had moved the goods that kept the hegemony wealthy. And for all of it, they had been paid less than any other species would have accepted. The final page was a single number. Xylos stared at it. He read it 3 times. He ran the calculations himself, using the hegemony's own formulas, and he got the same result. By the hegemony's own rules, by the laws that had governed galactic finance for 1,000 years, the humans were right. They owed nothing. And if they chose to apply the same interest rates that the hegemony had always applied to its debtors, the hegemony now owed the humans more wealth than existed in the entire Vorthan treasury. Xylos sat in the DAC, the data slate glowing in his hands, and he did not laugh. For the first time in 300 years, he was afraid. The first month was quiet. Xylos told himself the humans were bluffing. They had made their little show with the data slate, and now they would wait for him to laugh it off and return to normal. That was how these things worked. The weak made noise. The strong waited. And eventually, the weak remembered their place. But the humans did not return to normal. The second month, the tithe payment did not arrive. Xylos sent a formal inquiry. The Human Trade Ministry replied with a single sentence. * all payments are suspended pending review of outstanding contractual obligations. *. Xylos read the message 3 times. It was polite. It was formal. It was absolutely firm. He sent back a demand for immediate payment. The humans did not respond. By the 3rd month, the hegemony's economy began to show the first cracks. It started with the shipyards. The human-run facilities had built nearly 40% of the hegemony's warships. They had been fast, reliable, and cheap. Now they sat silent. Massive orbital docks, once buzzing with activity, hung empty against the stars. When the hegemony's naval command demanded an explanation, the humans cited contract renegotiations. They would resume work, they said, once the terms of their labor reflected fair market value. The ships that had been under construction stayed half-finished. The supply lines that fed those shipyards stopped moving, and within weeks, the hegemony's fleet maintenance schedule fell apart. Then the logistics system began to fail. Xylos had never thought much about the human merchant fleet. It was simply there, like gravity or sunlight. Millions of human-crewed ships moved goods between the stars with a quiet efficiency that no other species could match. They were the arteries of the hegemony's economy, carrying food, fuel, raw materials, and finished goods to every corner of Vorthan space. Now those arteries began to close. Human ships started reporting navigational delays. Engines that needed maintenance. Crews that needed rest. Routes that needed to be recalculated. Every delay was legal. Every explanation was reasonable. But somehow, the delays only happened on routes that led to Vorthan core worlds. Ships headed to human colonies or allied systems moved without issue. Food prices in the capital tripled. Fuel became scarce. Manufacturing plants on a dozen worlds slowed to a crawl as their supply chains dried up. The hegemony's economy, built on the assumption that human labor would always be there, began to shudder. Xylos called an emergency meeting of the Economic Council. The other Vorthan leaders were confused. They had never considered how dependent they had become. The humans had been so quiet, so reliable, so invisible. No one had noticed the web of necessity they had woven around the hegemony until it started to pull tight. Then the military officers began to leave. It started with a trickle. A human commander here, a logistics officer there. They submitted their resignations with perfect paperwork, accepted their pensions, and returned to human space. The hegemony's joint fleet had always relied on human officers for their tactical skill and their willingness to do difficult work. Now those officers were gone. Within 2 months, over 3,000 human officers had resigned. Their replacements, Vorthan and other client species, tried to fill the gaps. But the systems the humans had built, the supply chains, the communication networks, the tactical frameworks, had been designed by human minds. Without them, the fleet became slow, confused, and weak. Xylos finally decided to act. He could not force the humans to work. The hegemony's laws protected their right to negotiate contracts. But he could remind them what happened to those who defied Vorthan authority. He ordered a military force to 3 fringe human colonies. They were small worlds, far from the core, with small populations and limited defenses. Or so the hegemony's intelligence files said. The fleet arrived at the first colony and found nothing. No settlements, no infrastructure, no people. Just empty space where a colony should have been. Before the commander could report this confusion, a transmission came through. A human voice, calm and polite. You are in restricted space. Please state your purpose. The commander stated his purpose. He demanded the colony's submission to hegemony authority. The human voice paused for a moment. Then it said, "We were hoping you would try this." The stars around the hegemony fleet lit up. Defense platforms, hidden in the asteroid field, powered on. Weapons systems that intelligence had never seen locked onto every ship. And in the distance, a human fleet dropped out of FTL, not the small, outdated ships the hegemony expected, but sleek, modern warships that matched anything the Vorthan had. The commander looked at his scanners. He counted the human ships. He counted the defense platforms. He did the math. He withdrew. When Xylos received the report, he sat in his office for a long time without moving. The humans had not just hidden their military strength. They had built it, quietly and deliberately, for generations. Every outdated ship they had accepted, every old technology they had pretended to struggle with, had been a mask. Behind that mask, they had built something new. Something strong. Something the hegemony had never seen coming. He looked out his window at the capital city. The ships still moved through the DAC, but fewer than before. The lights still burned, but dimmer than before. And for the first time in 300 years, Xylos understood what it felt like to be the one who owed. The humans had not just stopped paying. They had called in their investment. And the interest was coming due. The council chamber had never felt so small. Xylos sat at the head of the table, surrounded by the leaders of the hegemony's most powerful factions. They were all there, the admirals, the trade ministers, the heads of the great financial houses. And they were all looking at him with the same expression. Fear. The economy was dying. The military was stretched thin. Uprisings had broken out on a dozen worlds, and every time the hegemony tried to put one down, 2 more started somewhere else. The admirals could not explain where the rebels were getting their weapons. The trade ministers could not explain why the supply lines kept failing. But Xylos knew. He had always known. The doors opened, and Ambassador Elias Vance walked in. He was alone. No guards, no assistants, no data slate full of numbers. He wore the same simple DAC suit he had worn every time they had met. But something about him was different. He walked differently. He stood differently. He looked at the Vorthan leaders not as a client species looking up at its masters, but as one power looking at another. Vance stopped at the center of the chamber and waited. Xylos stood up. His voice was sharp, angry, desperate. You have brought the hegemony to its knees. Your ships refuse to move. Your workers refuse to build. Your soldiers have abandoned their posts. And now rebels funded by your secret networks are burning our worlds. Explain yourself. Explain this act of economic warfare. Vance did not answer immediately. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a single sheet of paper. It was thin, ordinary, nothing like the glowing data slate he had brought before. He placed it on the table in front of Xylos. This is not warfare, Vance said quietly. This is accounting. The council chamber fell silent. Vance turned to face the assembled leaders. His voice was calm, steady, the voice of a man who had waited 300 years to speak. For 300 years, you taught us your ways. You taught us about contracts and obligations. You taught us about compound interest and long-term investments. You taught us that patience was the greatest strength of a civilized species. He paused. We were very attentive students. One of the admirals slammed his fist on the table. You were supposed to be grateful. You were supposed to serve. Vance looked at him without anger. We did serve. For 300 years, we served. We built your ships, moved your goods, fought your wars. We did everything you asked and never complained. And while we served, we watched. We learned. We grew. He turned back to Xylos. You made one mistake, High Arbitrator. You thought power was something you could hold. You built an empire. You wrote laws that kept everyone beneath you. You created a system where the strong stayed strong and the weak stayed weak. That is what empires do. He picked up the paper from the table. But we built something different. We built a network. Every ship we built for you, we learned how to build better ones for ourselves. Every trade route we ran for you, we learned how to run our own. Every war we fought beside you, we made allies of your enemies. We did not take your power. We grew our own. Xylos stared at the paper in Vance's hand. What is that? Vance held it up so the whole council could see. A treaty. He began to read. The words were simple. A restructured hegemony, with humanity holding a permanent seat on the High Council. Equal rights and protections for all client species. A new economic framework where no species could be trapped by debt. Fair trade. Fair labor. Fair laws. When he finished, he placed the paper back on the table. This is what we offer, Vance said. Not revenge. Not subjugation. We do not want to become what you were. We want to build something better. One of the trade ministers laughed bitterly. And if we refuse? If we take this paper and burn it and send your ships back to your little worlds? Vance looked at him for a long moment. Then he looked at Xylos. If you refuse, he said, then we will simply call in our debts. All of them. Every fee you never paid. Every resource you took without compensation. Every life lost in your wars. We will apply your own interest rates to your own obligations. And then we will walk away. He gestured to the window, where the lights of the capital city flickered dimly against the dark. The hegemony will not survive the weak, High Arbitrator. You know this. Every admiral in this room knows this. Your economy is already gone. Your military is already broken. Your people are already starving. If we pull out completely, there will be nothing left. The silence in the chamber was absolute. Xylos looked at the paper. He looked at the faces around the table. He looked at the humans standing before him, calm and patient, offering a way out that was also a way forward. He thought about the data slate he had laughed at, the numbers he had dismissed, the warnings he had ignored. He thought about 300 years of believing he was the master, never realizing that the servant had been building a cage around him the whole time. He reached out and took the paper. What happens now? He asked. Vance smiled. It was a small smile, not triumphant, just satisfied. Now, he said, we talk. Like equals. Like partners. Like people who have to share the same galaxy and want to make it work. He sat down at the table, across from Xylos, and waited. Earth was loud. Xylos stood on a balcony high above a human city, and he could not believe the noise. Ships flew in every direction, none of them following the proper traffic patterns. Music pounded from buildings below. People shouted, laughed, argued, all at once, always. It was chaos. It was madness. It was nothing like the quiet, orderly cities of the Vorthan homeworld. He had been on Earth for 3 days now. His new title was Cultural Liaison, which meant his job was to watch and learn and report back. It was a demotion. He had been High Arbitrator, one of the most powerful beings in the hegemony. Now he was a student again, learning from the species his people had once called primitive. He had asked for this position. The other Vorthan leaders thought he was strange for it. But Xylos needed to understand. He had spent 300 years looking down at humans, and he had been wrong about everything. He needed to see them with his own eyes, not through the lens of Vorthan superiority. The city stretched out below him, a mess of towers and parks and roads that seemed to go in circles for no reason. Humans moved through it like water, fast and unpredictable. He watched a group of young humans run past, laughing about something he could not understand. They did not notice him watching. They did not care. A voice came from behind him. You look confused. Xylos turned. Elias Vance stood in the doorway, older now, his gray hair thinner, but his eyes still clear and sharp. He wore the same kind of simple clothes he had always worn. He walked out onto the balcony and stood beside Xylos, looking at the city. I am trying to understand, Xylos said. It is so uncontrolled. Vance smiled. We like it that way. They stood in silence for a moment. Xylos looked at the city again, and this time he noticed something he had missed before. Among the humans, there were others. Vorthan merchants in their grey robes, selling goods from a small shop. Cathari engineers, their forearms busy with some project on a street corner. And others, species he had never seen before, species that had been slaves when the hegemony ruled alone. They walked freely. They worked alongside humans. They laughed and argued and lived like equals. Your people made this possible, Xylos said quietly. No, Vance said. Your people made it necessary. We just made it happen. Xylos nodded slowly. He thought about the treaty, signed 1 year ago. The hegemony had not collapsed, but it had changed. The old ways were gone. The client species were free. The debts had been restructured, and the humans had taken their seat on the High Council, not as masters, but as something new. Something the galaxy had never seen before. I came to apologize, Xylos said. The words felt strange in his mouth. A Vorthan did not apologize. A Vorthan was always right. But Xylos had learned that Vorthan pride was just another kind of blindness. Vance turned to look at him. For what? For everything. Xylos gestured to the city below. For 300 years, we called you primitive. We treated you like children. We took your labor, your resources, your lives. And we never saw what you were building. We never saw that you were growing stronger while we grew weaker. We were blind. Vance was quiet for a moment. Then he nodded. You were. But you are here now. That counts for something. They walked inside, to a small room with a table and 2 chairs. Vance poured a dark liquid into 2 cups and pushed one toward Xylos. Xylos had learned to drink human tea. It was bitter, but he had grown to like it. You asked me once, Vance said, what I wanted. At the council meeting. You asked what we were trying to achieve. Xylos nodded. You said you wanted to build something better. Yes. Vance leaned back in his chair. You asked for payment. For 300 years, the hegemony demanded payment from everyone. Resources, labor, loyalty. You thought debt was a tool to control. Keep people owing, keep them weak, keep them in their place. He gestured out the window, toward the city. But we saw it differently. We saw debt as an investment. Every ship we built, every trade route we ran, every war we fought, we were investing in something. Not currency. Not territory. Potential. Xylos frowned. Potential. The potential of a dozen species you kept under your heel. The Cathari engineers who could have built wonders if you had let them. The merchants from the fringe worlds who could have traded across the galaxy if you had not locked them out. The slaves who could have been artists and scientists and leaders if you had given them a chance. Vance set his cup down. We gave them that chance. And now the whole galaxy is invested in making sure they keep it. Because when everyone grows, everyone benefits. Xylos sat in silence, thinking. He thought about the old hegemony, stable and quiet and dead. He thought about the new galaxy, chaotic and noisy and alive. He thought about the Vorthan merchants trading alongside humans, the Cathari engineers working on joint projects, the former slaves walking free. You did not just win a war, Xylos said slowly. You rewrote the rules. Vance smiled. Someone had to. Later, Xylos stood on the balcony again as the sun set over the city. The lights came on, thousands of them, flickering like stars against the darkening sky. The noise did not stop. The chaos did not stop. But for the first time, Xylos thought he understood it. The humans had not won by being stronger. They had won by being patient. They had not defeated the hegemony with weapons. They had outgrown it, like a tree growing through a stone wall. The wall had crumbled, but the tree kept growing. And now, standing in the middle of that chaos, Xylos felt something he had never expected to feel. Not fear. Not anger. Not even respect, though he felt that too. Hope. He looked at the lights below, the humans and Vorthan and Cathari and a dozen other species living together in their beautiful mess, and he thought that maybe, just maybe, the galaxy was going to be all right. He smiled, took a sip of his tea, and watched the future unfold.